All right, folks. Well, it is 2 p.m. EST right on the nose here, so I think we'll get the show on the road just to capitalize on the full hour. And so, first of all, I welcome everyone to our January webinar. My name is Matt Del Bono, and I'm an extension support specialist here with the Glaze Consortium. And today we have a very exciting presentation, actually from our very own Glaze researchers, Dr. Neil Mattson and Dr. Tim Shelford. And the title of the presentation today is Advanced Plant Lighting Controls from Theory to Practice. And so before we get started, I just want to very briefly introduce you to Glaze. And so Glaze stands for Greenhouse Lighting and Systems Engineering Consortium, and we are out of Cornell University. And we're here to transform greenhouse lighting and systems management to support climate smart CEA. And we do so by conducting research, educating growers so that emerging technologies can be hopefully adopted faster and help growers save money and reduce the environmental impact of energy use in greenhouses. And so, just to jump forward here, the main ways that we support our members are, as I mentioned, our research, of course, which is focused on greenhouses and also includes agriculture. And we hope to help facilitate technology transfer by showcasing the results of new technologies' impact on plants. We also provide technical articles, short courses, and other workforce development initiatives to help educate growers. And then finally, our membership values our networking benefits via our industry advisory board and annual summit as well. And so our members are very valued, and we hope that you are potentially interested in joining Glaze as a member of our industry advisory board as well. And so if you would like to learn more, you can contact our team for additional information about membership and the various member categories that we have to offer. And finally, I would just like to note that we do want to highlight a new membership initiative called Vivid Canopy, where folks working in the CEA industry can connect and organizations can showcase how they're leading by example and hiring a more diverse workforce. And so our next event will be a panel and roundtable discussion at Indoor AgCon on March 11th, 2025. And our theme for that event is a diverse workforce in action. So we hope to see you there, and please feel free to contact me for additional information about that event and other Vivid Canopy initiatives. So with all that being said, I'd like to switch gears here and introduce our speakers and then turn things over to Dr. Mattson and Dr. Tim Shelford. So to get started,
Sorry. Did I steal your thunder, Matt? I'm going to dive into it.
Yeah, please go ahead. That's fine.
Just a maverick here. Good afternoon, everyone. Really nice to see old friends and new friends and a bunch of folks that are really smart and grow a lot of great plants. So looking forward to our discussion this afternoon. So I'm Neil Mattson. I'm a professor at Cornell and one of the co-leads of the Glaze Consortium. And I always like to say I'm a lowly horticulturalist. I speak for the plants, but I love playing with engineers like Tim Shelford, who will be speaking second today. So within the topic of advanced plant lighting control systems, I'll present for the first little bit here on kind of why it's important to think about plant lighting control. And so maybe then a little bit of theory. And then Tim will go more into theory and practice on more advanced plant lighting control and kind of our take on smart plant lighting algorithms and the types of savings that we can get from them. So one of the important talking points here is that solar light quantity is highly variable, and I'm going to share a few graphs. It's highly variable within a day, within a week, within a month, and from season to season as well. And so if we're growing plants in a greenhouse environment where we're expecting that solar light, some days they may be getting it and some days they won't. And Ithaca, New York, where Cornell University is located, is one of the cloudiest places in the US in the wintertime, at least. So this was a graph of, I guess it was January 2023, so 2 years ago. It was outdoor PPFD, so plant photosynthetically active light in micromoles per meter squared. And then these are 7 days. So this is 1 week. So within 1 week, there was a day that had higher light levels. At least during the middle of the day, we had up to 800 micromoles per meter squared per second of light. Then there were cloudy days when we would only get up to 160 or 200 during the middle of the day. And then you can also see even within a day, so we have kind of that peak or that curve as we go from sunrise to midday to sunset. But another feature that we have is within a day there's also like variable cloud cover. So some of these days there's more light and then clouds come and there's less light. So obviously our plants are photosynthesizing and doing what they need to do to give us good yields and quality. And so we probably need to add supplemental light to them on those low light days to give them what they need. And then this is the blue lines here are how the average daily light integrals or the cumulative daily light integrals came out for those days. So on those really sunny days, and this is outdoors, we were getting 9 to 10 moles of light. And then some of those cloudier days, we were getting 3 or 4 or 5 moles of light. And we'll talk about what that means in a second in terms of how much different plants would like to have. So anyways, within a week, it was varying by a factor of 5 in terms of how much light our plants got. And then if we look at that within days, within a year, I probably show this graph every time I give a talk. This was work done by our founder of the Cornell CEA group, Lou Albright. And this is each of these dots represents the daily light integral for one day over the course of 14 years. And then the distribution of this is day of the year. So day one of the year is January 1st. And then we move to the middle of the graph would be summertime. And then the end of the year is December 31st. So one of the things that we can see is in the summertime, on average, we're getting maybe 3 to 4 to 5 times as much light as we're getting in the winter time. So those are the seasonal patterns as our days are longer in summertime. And we get less cloud cover in the summertime. But another really interesting observation is that even within, say, the summer, there are cloudy days when instead of getting 65 moles of light from the sun, we get 5 moles of light from the sun. And then in the winter, that is even worse, where the maximum amount we get is about 17 moles of light. And then there's many days that we get 1, 2, and 3 moles of light. So light is highly variable from day to day. Oh, and then just to point out, this was outdoor daily light integral, as were my previous graphs. And on average, about 50 to 70% of that sunlight actually gets into a greenhouse. So our greenhouse daily light integral values, which is what we're concerned about for our crops, is actually lower. And you may have all seen this graph before as well. So Faust and Logan have a daily light integral tool, and you can actually go online and enter in your zip code and see what average daily light integrals are over the course of the year for your own zip code. But just to make the point that especially the northern half of the US has much lower light in the wintertime. So in January, regions that are getting 5 to 10 moles of light outdoors on average, or 10 to 15 moles on average. As we advance into February, March, days are finally getting noticeably longer. We're finally getting 20 or so moles of light. And then by the time we get into May and June, we're getting into those 45 and 50 moles of light. Versus if we were in the southwest of the US, even in the wintertime, Tucson, Arizona is able to get 25 to 30 moles of light outdoors. And then that's on the very high end of what we can get from the sun in the summertime, so 60 to 65. And why do we care about light? Of course, it's because plants are autotrophs, which is just a scientific way of saying that plants take photons of light and use them to drive photosynthesis. And that's what they use to fix carbon dioxide from the air into sugars and carbohydrates that feed their growth. And I think Tim and I were reflecting on this a couple days ago. Pretty much all life on Earth depends on this process, right? Because we need plants, and then animals or creatures higher up in the food pyramid are consuming those plants and then consuming animals that have consumed those plants and so on. There's maybe some very niche organisms that are microbes that can maybe feed off of sulfur or something like that. But life as we know it on Earth relies on this process. And then because of the process of photosynthesis, we know that within bounds, for every 1% increase in light, we get about a 1% increase in yield. And that's a very broad generalization, but it's a good, decent generalization to have in the back of your mind. And so any crop will kind of have that region where increase in yield is kind of linear or increases proportionally to how much light you get. And then at some point, you'll start to get diminishing returns where you'll add a unit of light, but you won't get that same amount percent increase in yield. So that's kind of the inflection point where we start to see diminishing returns for adding supplemental light. This graph comes from a Leo Marcellus paper from, I think, 2004, which is classic work. This was with cucumber and plotting yields of cucumbers in relationship to outdoor daily light integral. And so the 1% rule held true to about 20 moles of light. And then after that, the increase in yield was a little bit less. Similarly, all types of plants kind of have this rule, but then where they plateau might be lower in the case of floriculture crops. We had a study where we propagated petunia cuttings and we rooted petunia cuttings under different daily light integrals in a greenhouse. So those varied from 6 moles of light up to 15 moles of light. And what we saw is that as we increase the daily light integral, we decrease the plant height. So under low light conditions, plants stretch excessively, which is kind of a shade response. Under higher light, they also have increased branching and increased flower number, which is desirable for their quality characteristics, increased biomass, and reduced days to flower. In this particular study, we also wanted to see if there were benefits of adding far red light. So we added a small amount of far red during the day period. During I think it was a 16 or 18-hour photo period, we added 30 micromoles per meter squared per second of far red. And sunlight also has a bunch of far red. So in this case, under a background of low sunlight, our 6-mole treatment, we saw further stretching of the plant, so more shade avoidance response. We did see a little bit of evidence toward earlier flowering initiation with that additional far red, but in a greenhouse environment, for this particular crop, we didn't see that much positive effect of far red. And then after about 9 moles, that was kind of our sort of threshold where we think we should have at least 9 to 12 moles of light for producing good young plants in a greenhouse environment. And I think this is my last example just to further emphasize the point. This one was with baby leaf greens. This was an experiment from a former master's student, Charlie Gagney, where we had collards, lettuce, mizuna, and bok choy, and we grew them for about 14 or 17 days until their leaves were about 4 inches long, under daily light integrals of 6 all the way up to 30 moles. And we saw for every species that we looked at an increase in growth between that range. So these letters tell us the statistical significance. So even from 24 to 30 moles, we saw increases in growth. However, mizuna and bok choy were more responsive to those higher light intensities. So for collards and lettuce, maybe 24 moles is where we start to see those diminishing returns. But for mizuna and bok choy, lighting up to 30 moles seem to give us really great growth benefits still. And so with the different types of crops that we're growing, we kind of have these target light intensities, or at least these minimum, where on the low end of things, those floriculture crops or like bedding plants, for example, we're not selling pounds of tomatoes here or pounds of lettuce. We just need enough light to have good plant quality and flowering on time and so on. So about 10 to 12 moles of light per meter squared per second. For a lot of lettuce and herbs on the range of 12 to 17 moles. For head lettuce, we have to worry about the calcium disorder tip burn. That is kind of our limiting factor. So we can push head lettuce faster, but then it has issues with taking up enough calcium. For baby leaf greens, we can push it more. Like that graph that I just showed you, we could go up to 30 moles. And because we're harvesting it at a young stage, when it's not sensitive to leaf tip burn, we could push them up to 30 moles in some cases. And then for our fruiting crops, we tend to have a higher light intensity target. So cucumbers, tomatoes, sweet peppers, and strawberries as well. And one important point to make here is when we're thinking about our supplemental lighting systems, we have to think about how many hours of the day we can have those systems on. And it depends on the crop. So some crops need to have a dark period for their developmental processes. So like a lot of bedding plants, for example, are short day plants, and they need to have a pretty long dark period, like a 10 or 12-hour dark period, so that they'll flower on time. And um, lettuce and herbs, it will depend on the species. For lettuce, we can actually light it 24/7. It's a vegetative crop, and we don't need a particular photo period to initiate flowering and fruiting, for example. And then for vine crops, we typically need at least a minimum of a 4 to 6 hour dark period. And in that case, darkness is the signal for the plant to transport the carbohydrates that the leaves made to the fruit, which is like the sink of those carbohydrates. And if we don't have that nighttime signal, what will happen is those carbohydrates will build up in the leaves, and then we can get a physiological disorder. And then photosynthesis slows down because the leaves get what we call it biofeedback inhibition. The leaves are already high in carbohydrates, so the plant doesn't invest more into photosynthesis because it thinks that it already has sufficient sugars and carbohydrates. So then if we think about when during the day we can add supplemental light, we can use that to think through the supplemental lighting capacity that we might need to hit a target value. And this is just an example of a calculation of that. So for tomatoes, if we wanted to hit a daily light integral target of 20 moles per meter squared per day, which is kind of a minimum target for tomatoes. And let's say we need to have a 6 hour dark period. So that gives us 18 hours of the day that we can provide light. And then let's assume that at least most of the days of the year, we can count on at least 5 moles of light from ambient light. So that means we need to provide 15 moles of light per day from our supplemental lighting system, at least on those darker days of the year. So 20 minus 5 is 15. And then we divide that by 18 hours in a day that we have to apply that light. So that tells us that our supplemental lighting system should provide at least 0.83 moles per meter squared per hour of light. And then we can back calculate what that means in terms of the instantaneous amount of light, or PPFD, that our lighting system needs to provide. And so to do that, we have the hourly light integral target. We multiply that times 1,000,000 micromoles per mole. We divide that by 3,600 seconds per hour, and that tells us that we need an instantaneous lighting capacity of 231 micromoles per meter squared per second. And I think Tim will talk a little bit about this. We're finding that there can be benefits of adding a higher supplemental lighting capacity than what you might need in an average day, because it allows you to be more flexible with when you add light. And so you might be able to take more advantage of off-peak electricity, for example. So then I'm going to mention a couple different strategies for controlling light, and then I'm going to turn things over to Tim to talk about more sophisticated control types. So kind of the easiest way to control light, or the cheapest way to control light, is with a time clock. And other ways of controlling light are common in greenhouse climate control systems, which are a light threshold. So if light goes below a certain value, if sunlight goes below a certain value, then we turn our supplemental lights on. And if sunlight goes above some higher level, then we decide to close our shade curtains. And then Tim's going to talk about a more coordinated approach to targeting a daily light integral. So in the time clock approach, the lights are just set programmed with a time clock. This one looks like one that I used a lot in my master's and PhD work, setting what hours of the day lights would be on. And then maybe that depends on the month of the year. So in October through March in our northern locations is when we're doing most of our supplemental lighting. Um, a problem with these types of systems is they don't account for how much sunlight we're getting from outdoors. So if it's a sunny day, and we're not sure how to quantify a sunny day, some growers will just manually switch off the time clock for that day or override the time clock for that day, um, which probably is good for saving energy, but we don't really know how many moles of light our plants got then. Um, and so an example of a time clock approach could just be having lights on for 12 hours a day and maybe avoiding the middle of the day when we have the most sunlight, and maybe need the least amount of supplemental light during that time. So it could be like having our lights on from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then again from 4 p.m. to midnight. And if our lighting system was 100 micromoles per meter squared per second, times 12 hours a day, we can get an additional 4 moles of light per meter squared per day. Um, so I took some data. This was, I think, an average February in Atlanta, Georgia. And the amount of light that we get from the sun in a greenhouse with 70% light transmissivity are these orange bars. So depending on the day in Atlanta, Georgia, we could get 8 moles of light. On some of the higher days, we could get 14 moles of light. And then our daily light integral target in yellow would be like for bedding plants or floriculture crops at 12 moles of light. And then for head lettuce, this purple line at 17 moles of light. So without adding supplemental light, we can see that there's several days in a month where we hit our light targets for floriculture crops. There's no days of the month where we hit our target for lettuce. And then with the time clock approach, we're adding on those gray bars, that extra 4 moles of light. So that shows us that some days we're actually overshooting the lighting target for both floriculture crops and lettuce. And in the case of lettuce, that means we could probably be getting tip burn if we overshoot our target for 3 days in a row. Um, so it's not a particularly well coordinated way to add light, I guess, is what I want to mention here. So the time clock approach doesn't give us control over the daily light integral. There's a lot of opportunities for overlighting. So those days when we exceeded those targets, there's many days when we did not reach those lighting targets, so we're under lighting. So we could miss our crop schedule or have reduced yield under those conditions. Maybe the only good thing is it is a cheap way to control how we light. So we just need to buy a time clock and program that. We don't need light sensors or computer control. So then moving up in the level of technology is the threshold approach. And so this uses typically a greenhouse climate control system. Traditionally, it was based on light sensors that were outside of a greenhouse. And then solar radiation was measured. And then there would be a watts per square meter of solar radiation target. But ideally, we want to start thinking about measuring light inside the greenhouse. So like how much light actually got through from the sun, measuring it inside the greenhouse at plant canopy height. So what are plants truly getting? And then measuring it in terms of photosynthetically active light with our unit of micromoles per meter squared per second. So an example then of a threshold approach is if the light levels from the sun fall below 200 micromoles per meter squared per second for 10 minutes, then we would turn on our supplemental lights. If light levels fall below or go above that threshold for 10 minutes, then we'll turn the lights off. And then at some higher light intensity, like 600 micromoles for 10 minutes, then we'll close the shade curtains. And then what you might add on to this logic is at the end of the evening, if you haven't yet met your daily light integral target at sundown, then you could keep your lights on later into the evening until you hit that DLI target, or alternatively have lights start up again before sunrise to get several hours of lighting before sunrise to hit those targets. So some pros are this method does allow you to target a specific daily light integral, and it can then allow for consistent crop scheduling. Some cons or negative aspects is that this type of approach is just kind of thinking in the minute. So what's happening right now? This approach doesn't think about like how much additional sunlight am I expected to get during the day? Because actually, maybe if I thought about how many hours are left in the day and how much sunlight I could get, maybe I would not actually need to be turning on my supplemental lights right now. And so, um, and this approach also tends to have fairly aggressive shading. And so overall, when we've compared this to smarter lighting approaches that Tim is going to talk about, threshold control uses 20 to 30% more energy from turning on lights at times when it's not necessarily needed, and then having to overshade as well. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tim. This is just my transition slide. I asked AI what it thinks I do for a living, and this is what AI came up with. So I'm a cat studying lighting in a greenhouse with lettuce, and then looking at the economics and carbon footprint and so on. So, all right, Tim, we'll let you share your screen.
Hmm. I think you've got to unmute there, Tim.
And is
There we go.
Matt
Sorry.
perfect? I was going to say, as Matt noted, feel free to add questions to the Q&A, and we'll Tim and I will take them collectively together afterwards. And then Tim, if we're seeing the split screen,
Oh, not just the presentation. Okay.
yeah. Oh,
Oh,
if you click on display settings, yep, and then duplicate slideshow.
perfect.
Oh,
Okay.
there you go. Yep.
Great. Sorry about that. Yes, thank you, Neil. So as Neil mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the newer lighting control strategies that we have, and basically the grandfather of all this was my professor, Dr. Lou Albright, and he started this adaptive control as a way to control lighting levels for a greenhouse demonstration module that Cornell was developing. And initially, the to control the lights, they had to do calculations every day and adapt things so that they would get a consistent amount of light every day of the year. And so this was a really tedious process. And so to sort of simplify things, Dr. Albright came up with the LASSI control system, which is the light and shade system implementation. And so Neil's been talking quite a bit about lights, but the shade part is actually quite an important part of the LASSI control algorithm too. So that is limiting the amount of light so that we don't overshoot and get the potential tip burn. So as I mentioned, this was developed for lettuce, but it's been used for a number of other different crops as well. So the LASSI program is basically built to provide the same amount of light every day of the year so that we would get the same amount of growth every day of the year, which would make things easier for scheduling, for delivering to markets and such. So basically, this algorithm uses a means of predicting how much natural light there's going to be at the end of the day, and then it makes decisions about when to turn the lights on so that we'll hit our target and not exceed it. And so it also it delays supplemental lighting as long as possible so that we're not going to necessarily overshoot by applying too much light. And one of the benefits of operating this way too is if you're on an on-peak and off-peak lighting system, it will delay the lighting into the cheaper period, which is usually sort of overnight. And again, as I said, it uses shades to reduce the incoming light. Not everybody is on a system like that, but a lot of users do have that ability to take care of off-peak electricity. Now this works for lettuce because you can apply it, light 24 hours, but obviously with crops with a photo period, you can't take full advantage of the full off-peak period. So yeah, so this is sort of a variation on the slide that Neil showed, but so on the left we have the day of the year and sort of the variability that we get in the natural light. And then with a LASSI control system on the right, we have the integral that we get in the greenhouse. So we can take the really kind of sloppy natural sort of light and we can get really, really tight control if we have a good lighting and shading system. And although, as we can see right in the middle there, even in some of the brightest days of summer, even with shading, we still can overshoot. But for the most part, we can get very, very good control with a relatively simple system. So yeah, this is just sort of a visual of how LASSI works. We can see the yellow line is the integral of the solar, and so we can see how that starts up in the morning and then progresses through the day. And the gray lines are the integral that's applied by the supplemental light. And so we can see that around 6 o'clock that it's decided that, oh, it's got to turn the lights on to be able to hit the target by the end of the day, which is 6 a.m. the next morning. LASSI works from sunrise to sunrise. That's considered the lighting day. So yeah, but anyways, it reaches its target. We can also see the pricing of electricity on this graph where in the off-peak period, it's only 8 cents per kilowatt hour versus 12. This is from a while ago. Electricity prices are higher, but the same pattern is available today. So here is a plot of the costs of using LASSI over the course of a year. This is actually from simulation, but this is what we would see in a greenhouse in terms of the dollars per meter squared per day over the course of a year. And so we can see in the summertime, that we don't do a whole lot of lighting, and so the costs are very low. There are some occasions where we do need to light, and then presumably most of the lighting occurs in the dark winter months. And I've also shown lighting at two different supplemental lighting levels. So the 180 micromole lighting levels, the gray dots, that is a level that was decided on for the lettuce greenhouse for Ithaca, and that was to be able to hit the 17 mole target most of the days of the year. They would have 180 micromoles. However, if they were to increase that to 250 micromoles, they'd be able to take advantage of a lot more of the off-peak pricing, and so the price of operating the system would actually be lower. You would have to install more lights to be able and use more electricity at a certain time to be able to take advantage of that. But overall, you could bring your cost down by hitting those off-peak periods more. So another variation on LASSI is to take advantage of the effect of supplemental CO2 on crops. And so basically by elevating the CO2 levels, you can take advantage of the light that you have and get more out of it. So this plot shows the different light levels that we have here and different CO2 concentrations. So we can see that at basically ambient CO2 concentrations in 17 moles, we get this level of growth. We can get roughly the same level of growth at higher CO2 concentrations and lower daily light intervals. So yeah, basically the CO2 is enhancing the light that we have. And so the CO2 version of LASSI, basically the same goal as LASSI, like we want to get the same amount of lighting every day of the, or same amount of growth every day of the year, I should say. And again, it still tries to push the lighting and into the cheaper periods of the day. So this also improves on it by deciding when it would be advantageous to use CO2. So another consideration with that is we have to be able to predict what the temperature is going to be, because if the temperature is too high, we're going to have to ventilate, and so we would lose the CO2 that we have as well. So the CO2, there's an algorithm to predict what the temperatures are going to be so that we can avoid venting. Yeah. So with using the CO2 LASSI with the same data set and the same two lighting levels, we can see the sort of very similar operation to the basic LASSI, where in the summertime we don't have very much lighting, and then we have more in the dark periods. But I I'll have a table later to show the comparison, but the operational costs are quite a bit lower by being able to supplement with CO2, even taking into account the cost of using CO2. And then another flavor of LASSI is an expansion on the basic LASSI. But instead of just having like the on and off peak period, we are taking the published values of electricity prices 24 hours in advance. So the utilities, they know what their loads are going to be with a pretty good idea, and so they want to encourage users to not use electricity when it's expensive, and to try and shift their loads out. And so
I think we might have lost Tim. Neil, are you able to hear me or?
I can hear you. Yeah,
the day
yeah.
ahead market price
Oh,
Tim, you might have cut out for a few seconds. Maybe
electricity.
Tim, maybe turn up your video to help with bandwidth. Give us a moment here
yeah.
to check in with Tim.
I
Um,
I do have Tim's slides, Neil, if that's of help, but and I'll send him a message now to see if he has another way
Perfect.
to jump
Cool.
in.
We'll wait a minute here. I can address one of the questions that came in.
Oh,
Oh, cool. Oh, Tim, are you back with us?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
okay.
Do you want to share your screen again, or Matt has the slides too, if it would help for him to share it?
Sure. How about Matt shares it in that case? If I get lost again,
All
I'll
right.
I'll be back in. Sorry.
Sounds good. Yep, yep.
Yeah.
We're a well-oiled machine here.
Um, yeah. So basically, with the day ahead market price, we're sort of expanding on the on and off peak idea, but we're taking these prices, and these prices are published 24 hours in advance, and we get a price for every hour. And so I think we're just a couple slides back there, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, there's
Yeah. Okay.
there's another flavor, yeah. Um, yeah, so essentially it's just LASSI, but with a more complicated rate structure. And so again, I've done the same sort of simulation and plotted out the cost of operation. We still get the same, 17 mole per day, uniform target. Again, with the 180 micromoles and the 250, and we can see there's sort of maybe less benefit to the higher ones because we're taking advantage of the different prices during the day. Now this is going to vary, very significantly depending on where you are, because the prices are going to be all over the place for your location too. It's not just as simple as like the on and off peak pricing. So, but this was for a particular year in Ithaca with these with the setup. There wasn't that big a difference. So, maybe next slide. Okay, so yeah, so this is another flavor. So basically throwing CO2 into the mix with the day ahead market price. Again, we're looking at the least expensive of the hours of the day to apply the supplemental lighting and the CO2. So next slide. And yeah, so again, the familiar chart. We can see again, no lighting or very minimal lighting in the summer, and then lighting in the darker periods. And again, not a huge difference between the 180 and the 250 micromole capacity. So I think the next slide is a table which sort of has the costs, and so this is where we can really see the benefits of the different algorithms. So So with our basic LASSI at 180 micromoles per year, we're looking at about $30 per square meter per year to operate. And then we can see across as we go with carbon CO2 LASSI, almost half is the operating expense. It's slightly more than half. And then as we carry on, the day ahead market light price LASSI, only $11.34 per square meter per year. So big advantage of taking, almost a third of the original LASSI. Big advantage of being able to take advantage of the cheap electricity that you can get with the day ahead market price option. And then supplementing that with CO2, we're not doing, quite again half as much, but a very significant amount of savings with the day ahead market CO2 version of LASSI. Yeah, and then we can see also the benefits of the increased supplemental lighting capacity to 250 micromoles from the 180. Again, we're able to take advantage of those cheaper opportunities to have cheaper electricity. So yeah, so maybe let's do the next slide. Okay, so that was some of the work we did, and all those decisions were based on hourly sort of time steps. We had hourly prices, average light levels over an hour, and those algorithms were all developed with high pressure sodium lights, which really, they're quite efficient for the time, but they were not very good for being able to turn on and off. They have a really long warm up period, and you don't want to be turning them on and off even within a day up too many times. So part of the Glaze project was to take advantage of the new LED lighting technology where the LED lights can turn on and off really rapidly. And also we can control the spectral output of the fixture. They're not all just like one, one spectral output. We can have, red lights, we can have blue lights, we can have white lights. And we can vary that within the same fixture. And I didn't mention here, we can also dim the lights too. So it's not just an on and an off. We can output the lights at 10%, all the way up to full output. So these capabilities really improve the ability and things that we can do with our lighting control algorithms. So what we're calling real time, we make decisions instead of every hour on maybe like a minute or a 5-minute basis. And so we can adapt to changes in light and much more rapidly. So so the one of the real-time LASSI goals was the ability to specify an upper bound for the maximum amount of light that we wanted to provide, the natural and supplemental. So say, for example, we wanted to provide
Tim's cutting
Tim,
out a little bit again.
over the course of a day. Okay.
Tim, can you repeat the last 20 seconds or so?
Oh, sure. So, sorry about that. Yeah, basically the being able to specify upper bounds for the maximum amount of light is one of the things, as well as being able to change the output frequency or the spectral frequency. And also we can spread out the lighting over the course of the day a whole lot better. So next slide. So this is an example of the output, the daily light integral of a real-time LASSI demonstration that we had at the Cornell greenhouse. And so it looks like here the target was 20 moles, and this is what we got over the course of the day. And so yeah, pretty boring. So next slide. So here we can see what the actual output of the fixtures was on that day. So again, we had a maximum threshold of 300 micromoles, and we can see the output kind of vary quite a lot. And that was to make up the difference from the natural light to that 300 micromole level. So yeah, so we were able to maintain a consistent light level and hit our target. So that was one of the goals of this version of real-time LASSI. Next slide. So yeah, to make things interesting, again, we have a whole bunch more flavors of real-time LASSI. So we have our basic real-time LASSI, which controls a dimmable fixture to achieve the constant DLI and also have that maximum um, uh, um, light level. We also have a CO2 version of it. So again, we're using our dimmable fixtures and we're also supplementing with CO2 to achieve the consistent virtual DLI. And then we also have the spectrum control real-time LASSI, where we can set what we want to have in terms of a red-blue ratio. And so we can use the output of a fixture that has the ability to turn on red or blue so that we can have a consistent red-blue ratio throughout the day. And then, of course, we have the day-ahead market price version of LASSI to take advantage of some of the lower priced electricity. So next slide. So I haven't worked a whole lot directly with this, but I think the next sort of big thing in terms of lighting is going to be artificial intelligent control of the lighting systems. So um, they do rely on a lot of extensive data and sensor networks within the greenhouse. They're trained on large data sets, and obviously the bigger the data set with the more conditions they can have, the better it's going to be. The advantages of artificial intelligence is that it can be really tailored for your specific crop location and the setup that you have. You know, much more so than some of the other algorithms that we've developed can be. However, they might not always respond appropriately with situations that don't happen very often. So like, as I said, the bigger the data set, the better, but you can't necessarily always capture all the situations you might encounter. And even still, even with that kind of system, you still want to have human monitoring and intervention just in case there are some problems. Next slide. So Neil and our professor we work with, AJ, both at Rutgers, participated as a part of a team in a trial in the Netherlands where artificial intelligent systems were used to grow tomatoes in a greenhouse versus, or maybe this was, no, it was computer, it was tomatoes versus a grower.
Oh,
And
this
so
one was lettuce.
this was lettuce. Okay, sorry.
Yep.
There's a couple of them. Yes. So the reference was a human grower, and so they measured, the performance based on the profit in the bottom. And so we were on Team Koala, and we can see that our profit was the highest of the groups, even exceeding the reference grower. And so yeah, that was the algorithm that they controlled. Now, there were some costs associated with intervention, and that was when some changes had to be made to the algorithm because something wasn't quite working just right. So even with this system, there were some interventions required.
And this was a really cool proof of concept. We only had one growth cycle that was the training data set, and then the kind of real contest was this second crop cycle here. So I think there could be a lot of room for AI, especially if you have big data sets that you can train with for the data.
Next slide. Okay, so this was some data where we were demonstrating LASSI in some commercial operations in New York State. So we have them in 4 commercial greenhouses and sort of varying levels of technology. A couple of them have shades, a couple of them don't. One of them has high pressure sodium and the rest are LEDs. The lighting capacities are pretty low. So basically from 20 micromoles per meter squared to 70. So in reference, our lettuce was designed for 180. So 20 is pretty low for that. But and also these greenhouses have placed limitations on when lighting can be applied. So they have very strict, they're worried about their neighbor relations. And so they don't want to have lights on at night when there might be, interfering with their neighbors. And yeah. So next slide. Okay, so this was one operation and we had a relatively low target, 10 moles per meter squared per day, and we can see in the summertime, or the sort of the end of the summertime, the natural light, was really kind of enough, and I think the lighting system was helping a little bit, but not a whole lot. And then we can see, like, around November, we managed to hit our target pretty well, and then we just weren't able to keep up because we could only apply about a mole over the course of the lighting data that we had. So um, that was sort of a big limitation. So next slide. So this was another greenhouse, roughly the same period. Um, there's a lot more light, natural light in this greenhouse, and so we had a higher target, and yeah, again, this had a little bit more capacity. We could apply up to 3 moles per day, and so we were around our target of 15, quite a bit more. There was no shading system in either of these greenhouses, and so that's why we were exceeding the lighting level fairly often. So yes, next slide. Okay, so yeah, this is sort of what I thought might be some interesting points to consider. So a lighting control system really should be designed for the location of the greenhouse as well as the requirements of the crop. One like LASSI might really not be ideal for one type of crop. It was specifically designed for lettuce. If you really have limitations on it, maybe that's not the greatest control system for you. Um, Also, a lighting control system should also consider shades if the upper DLI is a real important consideration, and also potentially blackout curtains if you need to light at night and not disturb your neighbors. Again, I think it's advantageous to be able to take advantage of lower cost electricity if it's available. That's not something you necessarily get with the time clock or the threshold control. And also very important is the lighting system itself with the control system. Is the light uniform over the crop? Is there enough supplemental light? Are the fixtures efficient? And are they able to perform? Can they dim, and can they meet the spectral requirements of your crop? Yeah, so there's a lot of considerations when you're deciding on how you should control your lights. So I think that's the last slide. So yeah, I really like this slide because we're talking about the importance of information and data, and we can see how this light sensor is mounted over the crop, and behind it you can see the supplemental light. So clearly, the supplemental light from that light is not hitting the light sensor. It's being shaded by the mounting. So yeah, so there's lots of considerations and going into controlling your lights for the best. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim and Neil. We appreciate the presentation, and we've got some questions, so I think we'll use the time we have and jump right in. One person wrote in and asked, when you think about lighting cucumbers with potentially 300 micromoles per second per meter squared for 24 hours a day, what could be the negative or positive impact of doing this?
That's a great question. Sorry, just trying to play around with the screens here. So it's interesting. We talked about how with those fruiting crops, we typically need this 4 to 6 hour night period. And I was looking back at the scientific data, and there's not a whole lot of data for cucumbers. And there was actually some really good research that came out recently from the Harrow Research Station at Agri-Food Canada, where they looked at a lighting strategy of giving light for 16 hours a day for cucumbers. And then they had 3 different strategies where they provided light for continuous lighting for a 24-hour period of time. And while there might be some negative effects on leaf physiology, they did not see statistically significant reductions in yield when they were doing continuous lighting for that one particular, it was a mini cucumber cultivar. To me, that suggests we might be able to push cucumbers a little bit more. They might be more flexible in terms of when we deliver light to them. I guess there's probably still need for some more research on different cultivars of cucumbers. And another strategy that people will do when they're continuous lighting is they'll still have a somewhat cooler night temperature, so plants can still perceive a difference between day and night, and sometimes having that fluctuation helps plant performance.
Thank you. So another question, and this person acknowledges that we probably can't endorse particular brands, but they're wondering if there's a place that they can go or a list that you'd recommend for companies providing good quality solutions for greenhouse or indoor growing. Is there somewhere you'd recommend this person to explore? And
Ooh, I love the question. Maybe shoot me an email so I can go into it a little bit more in depth with you. I will say there's many professional horticultural suppliers, and I would maybe ask characteristics that I would look for is they've been in business for many years. They have testimonials from satisfied clients. And sometimes a reputable company is not always the cheapest company because they stand behind the goods that they sell. So look for like warranties on their products and things like that. But if you shoot me an email, I can brainstorm some specific thoughts with you.
I would say also that there's a lot of companies that are in this area, and they're getting a lot better. They're adding some of the adaptive controls. They're not just necessarily limited to time control or threshold control. I think a lot of them still have a long ways to go. And when we do our testing, it's usually we have our own hardware and we send them a signal. But yeah, there's lots of companies out there, and there's they're definitely pursuing this as well.
So Tim, maybe I'll add on to that. There was a later question that came in on what technologies can be used to set up the LASSI system and put it in place. And is it something that someone can go out and buy, or how would someone implement LASSI? What are your thoughts on that? And I can add on to that, of course, too.
Sure. Well, LASSI is now out of patent. So the original work was done in the early 90s, and so it is not patented. We've been using Campbell Scientific data loggers to implement LASSI, but I believe that Glaze might be working with a company. Is it microcontrollers?
Oh, microclimates.
Microclimate,
Yeah.
great.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Might be an option. I don't think we have sort of any formal relationship, but certainly the Campbell Scientific Data Logger approach is what we've been using. So
And there can be, if you have a central climate control system, they can often do programming for you on a contract basis. So we'd be happy to share the LASSI code with you. Or the algorithm is a fairly limited number of rules that actually have really good results. So it would be not too difficult to program into a commercial climate control system.
very good.
certainly, if you come across any climate control companies that you want to work with, or you have some existing ones, and you're interested in using LASSI, you can always pressure them. And we would love to work with them in terms of implementing adaptive control with their systems. So
Another question that came in is, do you expect this AI or LASSI AI, in parentheses, control method to become commercialized soon?
Ooh, from our end, we've been exploring AI for some other projects, but we haven't yet implemented our own LASSI AI. Maybe that'll be our next research project, Tim. What do you think?
maybe if the farm bill gets signed. So
Yeah, there you go. That one's new, but one of the things we are excited about with AI is, of course, because we're talking about optimizing light, but it's always like, how do you optimize temperature and relative humidity and other conditions in the greenhouse, irrigation? So it's really exciting to think about like centralized climate control systems that can integrate all of these factors together and kind of figure out what is the most energy efficient way to control a greenhouse based on all those factors.
Very good. And so I think we're caught up on the questions that have come in here. I'll just note that Neil posted a link to the paper that he mentioned earlier in the answered section, the Q&A. We've got just a minute or two left here in the hour, so.
Yeah, and I saw a really good comment noting the real-time LASSI work, um, and the ability to really respond to fluctuations in electricity prices. And we know like the Southern Ontario area where there's a huge amount of greenhouse vegetable production, there can be really large fluctuations in electrical price based on grid demand. So exactly, I do see a lot of important work that will need to continue to happen there. And the Hera Research Station there has also been doing some really novel work with using blue light in the middle of the night. And they seem to be able to get away with nighttime continuous lighting with using only blue light for some of those vine crops. So we'll stay tuned for more. That'd be another great webinar topic.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I was going to say too, with the real-time LASSI, as the grid evolves and we have a lot more solar power, the benefits might decrease because we might have, a lot of cheap electricity in the middle of the day when light is intense, and that's not when we need to use it. So, yeah, it could be very situation dependent, but again, I think being able to adapt to the changing prices of electricity is going to be very important. So,
Mhm.
Ooh, and
And
Matt, if I could use the last minute, I saw another question that came in, which is, are there considerations to add demand response? And Tim, you could help me brainstorm these. But in terms of demand response, I think some of it is we need to do more plant research to figure out how flexible plants are as to could they handle lower light at this time of the day and higher light at this time of the day and still perform well? Or is there some like minimum light intensity that we should try to provide them? And then there's probably other electrical uses in our operation that we need to keep electricity on for, like irrigation pumps or ventilation fans or things like that, even if electricity got expensive during that time.
yes, and I think again, like having the ability to dim LEDs and not be all on or all off, that gives us a lot more flexibility too. Maybe we can keep a minimum level of light on. And, we're not totally shutting things down, but we can greatly reduce our load on the grid. So yeah, but knowing what the physiological effects on the crops are, that's going to be, a big area of research that's going to need to be done. So, yeah, I think there's lots of work that needs to be done, and it's pretty exciting.
thanks so much. So I think we're caught up on our questions here and just at the hour, so we'll wrap things up. I want to thank both Neil and Tim for the presentation. That was wonderful, and also thank you to our attendees for the great questions. So always feel free to reach out if there are other questions that come up down the road, and we will be posting this recording to our website so you can view again if there's anything you'd like to review. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and thanks again.
Thanks. Take care,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye now.